Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is training, and we're going to discuss how your strength affects how you should train. So your strength level affects how you should train, different than somebody of a different strength level. So this concept has come up recently talking with some trainers that I help with programming, and I do like some ghost programming for trainers online. And one of the discussions we got into was why I had written something a little bit different for one of their clients than I had for a client of a similar issue in the past. And the reason why was because of the strength level difference of the two clients. And it was something that I hadn't thought about kind of discussing to them before. And it came up with a really cool discussion. We had a fun time kind of going back and forth via email with that. And it was something that sparked the idea to do a podcast based on it. So this podcast is probably going to still be a long one, so usually like 20, 30 minutes. But this is going to be an introduction to concepts that are related to difference in strength, how you would program or kind of how you'd create your own workouts, how you would train differently. So this is an introduction. And as I go through this, if anybody would like to learn more about a specific area of what I discuss, feel free to let me know and we'll make a separate podcast for it. But in general, if we look at making progress via training, so we're going to have the whole discussion today based on the belief that you're eating correctly and you're sleeping well, you're staying hydrated. So all the stuff outside of the gym is monitored, or at least paid attention to. So if we think of how we progress in strength, we progress in three main ways. We can either get technically better at the lift, and that allows us to put more of or express more of our true strength. So we can then increase like what would be like our 1 rep max. It isn't that you got physically stronger, you just got technically better at showing your current strength. Then there's physical development, to where you actually do just get physically better. So maybe your strength is only 80%, but you've increased your overall power output, like your ability to be strong. So even if technique hasn't improved, if you're just stronger in general, with the same technique level, you'll be able to express more strength. And then the third one is mental, meaning that sometimes people have pretty good technique. They have whatever their current strength level is, but whenever they get into a big moment or trying for 1 rep max, or when there's quote unquote pressure on them, they don't perform well. So therefore, they can get stronger or express their strength better by getting mentally stronger. So you have technique strength, physical strength, and mental strength, that if you address any of those three, hopefully you're addressing all of them, that you will get stronger. Excuse me for a second, I might have to cough. So that's going to be your focal points when you try to progress in strength. And what it has to do with is one component that's important to kind of think of is nervous system exposure. So in order to get stronger, you have to get under things that require strength, which is usually a shock to your nervous system. Your nervous system has to improve its communication from the mind to the muscles, be able to fire a higher percentage of the muscle fibers, be able to fire them at faster times or at certain sequences. There's a lot that has to do with the nervous system. Whereas if you think of progressing in muscle size and muscle shape, that absolutely does have to do with the nervous system. But we're mostly going to be focused on muscular damage. We're going to try to stress the muscular cells of the body, so the muscle fibers, and damage them using force, like from weight training, resistance training. We're going to damage the fibers in a rate in which the body says, holy crap, my fibers are getting beat up and damaged, they can't handle this. Let me reinforce them, let me make them bigger, let me make them strong, like thicker, stronger structures, so that way they can handle this workload. So when you do that to a muscle, when you damage it, your body has to respond. So that's actually what you're doing with resistance training. When they're in the gym, you're actually tearing up your muscle, you're beating it up. So you can beat it up through sheer force damage, which just means you do something really freaking heavy and that rips the muscle up. Or you do what's called metabolic damage, which is just you're using something like a muscle cell for a time under tension and a weight load combination that it's not used to. So therefore, it can't reinforce the mechanics of a contract release cycle like repeatedly, blah 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 blah. But anyhow, sorry, didn't want to get too lost in that. So you can move really heavy stuff, or you can move medium stuff until it burns like hell. And that burning creates like soreness, and kind of like our muscle feels like achy, and it was like, oh, that was horrible, so I need to adapt. So without us getting too sciencey, you can lift really heavy shit, and that tears up the muscle. Or you can lift mediumly heavy shit for a mediumly like decent amount of time, and it burns up the muscle. So that's how you get muscles to get bigger. And also with shaping is you would just be targeting the specific muscles you want to get bigger compared to other ones, so you can change your overall shape. It's not like every muscle in your body has to get bigger. You can just pick which ones you want to get bigger, okay? But if you focus on one or the other of those stimulus, so shear weight or the metabolic, like burning muscle burn kind of things, if you just do one only, you will be limited in how much overall development you can achieve. So people who just lift heavy weights, they do get bigger, but they're not as big as they could be. People who just do muscle pump and kind of blood flow pump and getting things to burn, they're going to get bigger, but they're not going to be as big as they can be. So you have to have both components in order to get full overall development. Okay. Now, we've talked about in past podcasts like time under tensions and rep ranges and all that stuff that is specific to which goal you want. Whether you want pure strength development, strength expression, whether you want muscle damage with the heavy stuff or muscle damage with the burning stuff. We've talked about all that stuff in the past. So we're going to move on to that and discuss about exercise selection based on strength levels, exercise execution. So how do you do the exercises that you chose? And then programming concepts. So the first thing let's look at here is exercise selection. So one of the things we think of when we start picking about what we should do in our workouts is the exercises is, should I do what are considered like big compound movements, or should I do isolation movements? So compound movements are exercises that use multiple muscles at once. So if we think of a squat, that's going to use all the muscles in your legs. It uses your butt, uses your abs to brace you, uses your upper back to brace you. There's a lot of muscles involved in both bracing and moving. Okay? If we think of a dumbbell chest press, so our chest, our front shoulders, and our triceps are the things that are contracting to move the dumbbells, but we also have to have our upper back braced. We have to have some kind of bracing in our core. Typically, it's going to make you strongest to have your feet down on the ground and have your legs somewhat flexed and braced. So compound movements are exercises that involve a lot of musculature. So they have a lot of muscles bracing your position, and they usually have at least two or more muscles actually moving the weight. So if you think of a squat, our upper back, our lower back, our abs, and our upper body tightness does not move the barbell. So they are bracers, they are not movers. So they are involved in a squat, but they're not actually grown by a squat. Now, some people will argue if you squat heavy enough and you squat long enough over years, that squatting can thicken your upper body. Yes, but we can all agree that squatting is not technically an upper body exercise. So let's just go with that. So squats are typically, okay, how you would define them is they're an exercise to target your quadriceps, your hamstrings, and your glutes. Now, other muscles are involved, like we said, but those are the ones that grow from squats specifically. So squat is a compound movement. It targets more than one muscle. It targets your quadriceps, your hamstrings, and your glutes. Whereas an isolation exercise is exactly what it sounds like it is. It isolates one muscle separate from other muscles. So if I think of a leg extension, that is going to use just my quadriceps, not my hamstrings and my glutes. So a squat is compound. It uses multiple muscles. A leg extension is isolation. It uses just one muscle. The reason why this is important to know is if I am a weaker person, okay, I'm not very strong, then I don't want to spend a lot of time doing isolation exercises. The reason why is if I'm isolating out all other muscles to where only this one specific muscle can work, usually if you're weak, the weight load that you have on that working muscle now is so low, it barely constitutes making enough progression. So what that means is if I'm not very strong and I do leg extensions, maybe I can only leg extend 60 pounds. Whereas in squats, maybe I can squat 150 pounds. Now, yes, if I'm doing squats, my hamstrings and glutes are helping, meaning that if I go from 60 pounds in one lift to 150 in the other, that isn't solely an increase in just my quadriceps. So I didn't go from 60 pounds on the quads to 150 on the quads by going from leg extensions to squats, but I am overloading the quad muscle because it's going to cause more overall stimulus due to the heaviness of the weight. So I'm more likely to cause more of that shearing damage force, okay, and a higher degree of metabolic damage because I have more muscles involved. So I have more muscles trying to keep up with the movement. So another example of this is lateral raises versus overhead presses. If someone is weak and maybe their best dumbbell overhead press is just 20 or 25 pound dumbbells, and then if they tried to lateral raise where they isolated away the triceps and they tried to just target maybe just the middle delt, the middle shoulder, they maybe can only do 3 to 5 pound dumbbells. Is 3 to 5 pounds enough weight to cause the shearing force into the shoulder muscle that we need for growth? The answer is no. So this is going to be a little bit hard to narrow down to you, the specific lifter, because I would have to see your body type, your muscle fiber type. Maybe you're strong in some lifts, but not in others. So how do we know that 3 pound dumbbells isn't heavy enough to cause muscular damage? Just because you can do 3 pound dumbbells till you're blue in the face and they're not going to make muscles grow. So I've been personal training since I was 18 years old. So I've trained well over 1,000 people, like significantly over that. And you'll see that does 3 pound dumbbells in certain people cause the muscle to feel burning pressure? Yes, you can get a muscle burn out of 3 pound dumbbells. But does that equate to long-term significant growth and or shaping? Not really, because the amount of stress into the muscle is so low because the weight is so low. So for people who are weaker, they would be better off stimulating their shoulder growth by doing overhead presses, a compound movement that uses the front, the middle, and the rear shoulder for stability, and it uses the triceps to help as well. And you could even argue in certain positions the upper chest is involved. But what you want to try to do is, if you're a weaker lifter, you want to focus more commonly on movements that involve more muscles. So since you're on the weak side, if you isolate into single individual muscles, you're not going to get significant damage because you're not strong enough to really create use a heavy enough weight to damage that. Okay. Now, what about if somebody's really strong? I've had clients who can do lateral raises correctly with 40 pound dumbbells. They can do overhead presses correctly with 120 pound dumbbells. If they're always doing the overhead press, okay, rather than the lateral raise, they can move so much weight that the 120 pound dumbbells starts to aggravate their joints. So it can actually create straining tension in the connective tissue of the muscle, and it can create straining tension in the connective tissue of the joint. So if they only ever do compound movements, they'll find that they're often going to run into joint issues and muscular strains because the amount of strength they have is so high that they can truly, absolutely, truly test and work the structure of the muscle. So think about somebody doing an overhead press with a 20 pound dumbbell. It's very unlikely that you're going to cause any stress into the joint. Okay? Because our joints are strong enough to handle 20 pounds going through them with very little concern. So this is something we want to think of when we're thinking of, do I do compound movements or isolation movements? If you're weaker, you want to do more compound. If you're stronger, you want to mix in more isolation to protect your joints. So what we found in the past is I might have had female client where maybe in order to get their bench press stronger, they were doing skull crushers. So which is a line dumbbell tricep extension. So it's an isolation just for their triceps. But they were using 8 pound dumbbells. Whoop-de-freaking-do. That ain't going to work. Okay? Now, were they trying their best? Yes, I'm not trying to talk negatively on them. They didn't know. They were doing what their program said and or what somebody advised to them. But does 8-pound dumbbells for lying tricep extensions, is that really going to transfer over to benching well over 100 pounds? No, not really. It's such a low light stimulus that it's not really going to transfer. Would it have been very hard for them to do? Yes. But does it have a high degree of transfer? The answer is no. So you want to pick movements. If I want to be strong in a bench press, I have to pick movements that are still heavy and movements that still cause like an overall stress to my body that would be significant enough to translate to the bench press. So that's something to think of, okay? I'm going to try to move faster because I think I'm getting the point across, but I'm probably beating a dead horse at this point. Is if you're weak, you need to do compound movements more often. So if you have isolation movements in your program and you're a weak person, okay, then I'm letting you guys decide that. Isolation movements are kind of a waste of your time. Swap them out for compound. If you're a strong person and you only have compound movements and you find all the time you're kind of fatigued, maybe your elbow hurts, your shoulder hurts, you always have some kind of joint stress, you might need to swap out some of the compound movements for more isolation movements, okay? Now, the next thing we have that we want to look at for exercise selection is free weights versus machines. So free weights refers to something that can move in any direction. That would be dumbbells, barbells, plates, kettlebells, things that you have to stabilize and move. Then machines are things that are stabilized for you. Obviously, a machine is a machine, so that kind of makes sense. So if I'm sitting on an overhead press machine, that is a machine. The machine balances the weight for me. I just have to move it through the plane of motion. I don't have to balance as well. So if someone is weak, they want to use free weights more often. Now, this doesn't mean that they can't or shouldn't use machines. What this does mean, though, is they shouldn't only use machines. The benefits of using free weights, even when you're weak, okay? So, for example, somebody will say, well, if you think of an overhead press on a machine versus an overhead press with dumbbells, they might be able to press more overall weight on a machine than they can with a dumbbell. Why would they not want that? Why would they not want the thing that's the heavier option? The problem is, if you never develop your balancing muscles, you will reach a peak of performance on that machine that is lower than your true performance peak, okay, your true performance ceiling. So you have to build your stability muscles. So it's better for someone who's weak to lift with free weights more often. This addresses more musculature, it helps them build stability, and then over time they can use significantly more weight. So it's kind of like an investment into the future. So machines help them use heavier weight today, but using free weights more often will help them use heavier weight tomorrow, that kind of thing. So somebody who's weak, you want to focus mostly on free weights with some machines here and there for overloads. If someone is strong, they want to create a very good mix, because if you only do free weights, you're going to beat the shit out of your joints. If you only do machines, well, then you're not building your stabilizer muscles either. So you need to have a mix, but you probably need to have more machines in your mix than someone who's weak. They would have less machines in their mix. Okay? So now let's move on to execution performance. So now that you know the right exercise or what you should do, how do you do it? For in regards to number of sets, like how many bouts of effort you do per exercise. So if you're weak, you need more overall sets than someone who's strong. And the reason why is if you're weak, per set, you are not able to achieve as much damage as somebody who's strong. So since you're weaker and you can't move as heavy of weight, you're going to need more sets to get the same degree of damage. Just makes sense, right? Okay. So if someone's weak, they need more sets than someone who's strong. If someone's who's strong, they might need less sets. So as you get stronger in training, it would not be uncommon and it would not be incorrect for your total number of sets to decrease as you get stronger and stronger. Now, repetitions. So how many reps per set or how much time under tension per set should you do? If you're weak, you need to be on the lower end of the time under tension ranges that are still appropriate for you. So if we know muscle growth happens anywhere between 20 to 60 seconds, where if you fail an exercise because it's so darn heavy you can't do it anymore, between 20 to 30 seconds, that tends to be a very heavy weight. And if you're super strong, that might be so heavy that it causes stress in your joints. Whereas if you're weak, if you go lighter than that, where you do something for maybe 40 to 60 seconds, it might be so damn light that it doesn't create enough muscle damage. So if you're a weaker lifter, you need to lift heavier more often. If you're a strong lifter, you can benefit from a mix and actually get really good benefit from lighter lifts, lighter exercises where you go for a high degree of blood flow. That helps to kind of stress the muscle but not stress the joint. So there's some tips there. So what about intensity techniques? So when I think of, okay, I'm doing a set to failure, maybe I want to spice it up, maybe I want to add rest pause, maybe I want to add drop sets, maybe I want to do something special. If you're weak, you need to add techniques that maintain heavier weight loads into your muscles. That would be an example of rest pause. So if I want to do a set beyond failure, where say normally I've been doing my exercise for a set of 8, and the 8 reps I would just stop because that's the best I could do. What if you're like, well, I want to try a little bit harder, I want to do something extra special? There's a technique called rest pause, where if typically you've been doing sets with 60-second rests in between each set, you can take a set to failure, you can rest the weight, you can pause for a short rest time. Maybe only 5 seconds or 10 seconds or 20 seconds, depending on the movement. The bigger the movement, the bigger the mini rest. Okay, so for squats, a 5-second rest doesn't do diddly. For lateral raises, maybe a 5-second rest is enough. But you would rest the weight, you would pause, and then you would pick the same weight back up and try for a couple more reps. So maybe you get 8, you take a 10-second rest, and you only get 2 more. But that's 2 more than your body was used to, therefore it'll be forced to grow and adapt. So that's rest pause, where you do a technique where you get extra repetitions beyond failure, but you get it with a same weight load, okay, a heavy weight load. Whereas drop sets, you would take a set to failure, you would put those weights down, you would drop in weight to a lighter weight, pick that up and keep going. So maybe for that one you go to 8, you put those weights down, you immediately pick up lighter weights so you get more reps, but maybe you get only 4 to 5 reps that time. Now, that is more like repetitions, but it's more repetitions at a lighter weight. So if I'm already weak, I don't need lighter weights. I need heavier things. If I'm already strong and I stay with heavy stuff like rest pause all the time, I might beat up my joints. So I would actually benefit maybe from drop sets because it allows me to continue muscular damage without continuing stress damage. So if you're a weak person, you need techniques that maintain heaviness. If you're a strong person, it's okay to use techniques that actually allow you to drop down in weight. So those are some tips for execution, okay? So if you're weak, you need more sets and you need less reps. You need heavier stuff. If you're strong, you probably need less overall sets, and you can benefit from a mix of heavy and high rep stuff. And for intensity techniques, if you're weak, pick stuff that lets you still use heavy weights. If you're strong, you can kind of do a mix of whatever you feel like doing, okay? Depending on whatever your joints and recovery allows. The last thing we're going to cover here for conceptual stuff before examples is programming concepts. So frequency of training. How often should you train a muscle or a lift based on your strength level? If you're weak, you need to train it more often. If you're strong, you would benefit from training it less often. And it has to do with skill acquisition, it has to do with recovery. So if I'm weak, chances are I'm new to the lifts, and the more often I do them, the faster I can learn them. Chances are if I'm strong, I'm already familiar with the lifts, I don't need as much repetition for technique performance, okay? Or technique improvement. Then what about recovery? If I'm weak per workout, I can't create as much damage as somebody who's strong. Therefore, I need to work out more often. Someone who's strong per workout can create a significant amount of damage. Therefore, they might need to train less often. So frequency is more often if you're weak, less often if you're strong. What about loading waves? So in your program, a correct program will have waves of intensity or volume, or mixture of both at differing levels. But there are ways to push your progress in a program in which over time of a program, it could be 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever, But over a determined period of time or a predetermined period of time, over that period of time, you can increase the intensity of what you do, meaning the heaviness and the stressfulness on your body. That is what somebody who's weak is going to want to focus on. Over time and from program to program, they want to do waves of intensity, meaning things that are just heavy and beat the shit out of you. Okay? So that way it pushes their body into adaptation. Whereas if someone's already strong, if they do programs of a high intensity, like intensity waves, they can actually accumulate small aches and pains, small injuries, annoyances, get some big injuries, and or get fatigued and get burned out with training. So they need to actually wave in volume to push themselves forward as opposed to intensity all the time. If they wave in volume, they can better manage small injuries and annoyances and better manage fatigue. So they would want to mix waves of intensity and volume depending on what time of the season or what their goals were if they have any competition style goals. So getting closer to a competition, they would want to wave intensity. Away from a competition, they would want to wave volume. But if you're weak, you always want to be waving intensity. You don't want to do more of light stuff. That ain't going to help. So waving volume doesn't help as much. For someone who's weak, you need to wave intensity. Now, progression expectations. What are my expectations for how much I can improve in a program? If you're weak, you should be able to improve more frequently and to larger steps. So if somebody's like brand new to squatting, they might hit a PR every single month for like 6 months. If someone's been squatting for 20 years, there's no chance in hell they're hitting a PR for 6 months in a row. So when you're weak, you can expect and you should expect to progress in strength and or size at a faster rate, okay? As you get stronger or as you get more developed muscularly, the progressions slow down. And that's normal, so you're not doing anything wrong. That just happens over time. The last thing we want to look at is focal points in your training. So if you're weak, we talked about the 3 ways you can get stronger is technique, physical development, and mental development. Okay, so technique strength, physical strength, mental strength. If you're weak, you absolutely need to work on technique. Okay, you have to learn how to do the lifts. You have to learn how to do them safely, firstly, and then you have to learn how to do them optimally in terms of best expressing your strength. So you would want to do technique-based work more often in your program. In programs like that, it's not uncommon for somebody to squat, say, 3 times a week, bench 3 times a week, and deadlift twice a week. That is a common way to structure like strength-based programming, okay? So they need a lot of technique. But the mistakes they make is they don't mix in enough physical and mental development. So they need to mix in overloaded styles of those lifts, meaning like reverse bands or assisted in some way using weight releasers, on certain lifts, or using a lower rep ranges. So they might need to benefit from doing like, say, 10 sets of 2 reps rather than like a 5x5 type program. So if someone needs to get both technique and increase physical development, they need to have very high intensity styles of technique work. If someone's already strong, they don't need that high of intensity because they'll just beat the shit out of themselves and they'll hurt their joints. So for someone who's strong, it's beneficial for them to separate out their technique work versus their physical development work. So it's almost like they'd have like technique work, then their heavy accessories, or they can just do heavy technique work and then be done. But that doesn't usually develop their weaknesses, so they still need to throw in those accessories, okay? So if you are a weak lifter, you need to do technique more often, but you need technique work at high intensities. So you got to mix that in, okay? So that'll also help your mental strength as well. If you're a strong lifter, you still need some technique, but maybe you only need to squat once a week, bench once a week, and deadlift once a week. And that's enough to keep your technique. The rest of the work is all done with accessories, so you can build your weaknesses. So it kind of depends on what your ability is technique-wise. But if you're a weak lifter, don't just technique yourself to death. You have to still physically develop. So you have to find overloaded styles of technique work. So let's go through 2 practical examples, and then I'll kind of cut it here and let you guys kind of digest some of this information. So one example is improving bench press. So if I'm improving bench press strength and I have a weak athlete, they would bench with the barbell more often. so that way they can improve technique. We would use overload techniques as often as possible, which is like reverse banding. Okay, that helps you overload and use more weight than more normal. Another example of that is a slingshot, but I don't like slingshots because I think they change your technique too much, especially on weak people who don't know their technique. So they're not going to fight against a slingshot to stay in a good position. They're going to let the slingshot determine their position, which is not the right way to do it. So I prefer reverse banding. You can also do, like we said, is swapping up the sets and reps for higher number of sets with lower number of reps. That allows them to use a heavier weight load, and that in turn is a form of an overload progression. So making somebody do heavy singles and doubles more often in their training is common of somebody who's weaker. Then with their accessory lifts, they would do big compound accessories. So maybe after squats, they would do leg press and hack squat rather than leg extension and leg curl. Okay? So if we're doing bench press in this example, like we said, we're going to do barbell more often. We're going to use overload techniques of, say, reverse banding or higher set count with lower reps. And maybe their accessories would be like dumbbell presses and maybe like dips. So if they can do dips or assisted dips. So you're going to look for movements that involve a lot of musculature. So they're going to do, like we said, dumbbell presses in different positions and different angles, dips, push-ups, things that use a lot of muscles. Okay, even chest press machine.